It's 14:15 p.m., and the roar of two JT-8D engines fills the desert air as a Boeing 737 hurtles down runway 02 of an Algerian airport. Inside the cockpit, the first officer pulls back on the yoke. Rotate. The aircraft lifts off, heavy and slow in the thin mountain air. But suddenly, a violent bang. The aircraft yawls left. A shudder ripples through the cabin. "What's going on?" the first officer cries. Warning tones scream in her headset. Engine number 1, gone. Firelights flash. At 300 feet, the captain suddenly takes control, unprepared, uncertain. The landing gear still hangs down, drag increasing by the second. The speed decays, 160 knots, 150, 140. The stick shaker rattles violently. Don't sink, blares the GPWS. The captain fights the controls, desperate. This is a scenario every pilot trains for twice a year. But what happens when the carelessness and negligence from a pilot have set the stage for disaster? In today's episode, I'm going to tell you the story of Air Algerie Flight 6289.
I am Captain Jack Mercer. What you're going to watch now is the story from the perspective of a pilot who has lived and seen a lot in 25 years of experience. Welcome aboard.
So we are on March 6th, 2003. Tamanrasset, Algeria. Air Algerie Flight 6289 is preparing for a two-leg domestic flight. First to Hardaya, then continuing on to Algiers, the capital. On board, 97 passengers and 6 crew members, including 2 pilots. Actually, 100 passengers had been booked, but 3 had document issues during check-in and were denied travel. And as you must be thinking right now, those 3 would later consider themselves very, very lucky, my friend. Among the passengers is a 28-year-old conscript assigned a seat in the very last row in front of the aft galley. Instead of fastening his seatbelt, the guy decided to not do it. Why am I telling you about him? Well, soon you will understand. Now, the aircraft. It's a Boeing 737-200, not exactly new, you know. It was delivered brand new to Air Algerie back in December 1983, making it almost 20 years old, which doesn't mean trouble, right? This bird was maintained accordingly and had no open defects on the day of the flight. Both engines are technically in check, but again, they have serious time on them. The left engine has over 30,000 hours, the right engine has close to 23,000 hours. It means these engines had been working hard for a long time. And that left engine? Oh yes, it's going to play a critical role in this story. But there is already a problem before the boarding. A hydraulic pump issue, System B, is delaying the flight by almost 3 hours. The maintenance team is working on it, but this delay meant the departure would now happen around 2 p.m., the hottest time of the day. And yes, there is a reason why I'm pointing out the temperature. Because an aircraft in hot weather needs to accelerate to a high speed using less available thrust before it takes off, and it means a longer takeoff distance and less ability to carry weight, understand? Now, pay attention, my friend, because here's where things get, let's say, interesting. The captain didn't show up for the pre-flight briefing with the rest of the crew. A pre-flight briefing is a meeting where the flight crew and, in some cases, other support staff review critical information for a safe and efficient flight. It is very important because it ensures everyone is on the same page by discussing potential issues, setting expectations, confirming procedures, and enhancing teamwork and safety before takeoff. If you watch this episode here, do you remember? You already know what can happen when pilots skip the flight briefing, right? So the pilot decided he is going to arrive later, once the hydraulic issue is fixed. The first officer, who actually showed up on time, is left to complete all the pre-flight preparations by herself. Yes. Now, let me tell you about these 2 pilots. The captain, Bolam Benawicha, was 48 years old with 10,760 total hours. More experience overall, right? But here's the catch. He'd only been a captain on the 737 for around 1,100 hours. Less type experience than the co-pilot. And get this, he was also operating as a first officer on the Boeing 767 within the same company. In the 30 days before this flight,
He'd flown about 31 hours on the 767. The first officer, Fatima Yousafi, was 44 years old, with 5,219 total flight hours. Of those, 1,292 hours were on the 737-200, solid experience on the type. So the first officer begins her pre-flight work. She checks the weather for both legs. Everything looks fine, but the temperature is steadily climbing, and Tamanrasset Airport sits at an altitude of around 4,500 feet. This creates something we call density altitude. Let me explain. Density altitude is critical. It's the altitude that aircraft performance is calculated on, corrected for temperature. Hot air is less dense, fewer air molecules moving around the wings and through the engines. This means less lift at a given speed and less thrust. In hot weather, the aircraft needs to accelerate to a higher speed using less available thrust before it can take off. Longer takeoff distance, less ability to carry weight. So with the delay, the aircraft would now depart around 2 p.m. The first officer continues reviewing the NOTAMs and flight plans. Nothing unusual stood out. Eventually, she and the cabin crew walk out to the aircraft and start preparing it for departure. Since she's the only pilot there, she prepares herself to operate as pilot flying for the first leg. She completes all the initial setup and walk around by herself. She also asked the fueler to uplift 4.6 tons of fuel, bringing the total departure fuel to close to 10 tons. So the aircraft is about only 800 kilos away from the maximum takeoff weight. Keep that information in mind, okay? So finally, the captain arrives. He agrees to let the first officer fly the first leg, but instead of helping her with the preparations, he starts talking to the male purser about some unrelated stuff, just chatting away.
You must be thinking, Captain Jack, who the heck is the purser? And what is he doing in the cockpit? Good question. A purser on a flight is the chief flight attendant who is in charge of managing the cabin crew and ensuring passenger safety and comfort. Also known as the lead flight attendant, the purser is the point of contact between the flight crew and the cabin crew, coordinates administrative tasks, and handles customer complaints and in-flight issues. So, the maintenance team finished the work on the hydraulic pump, and the cabin crew start boarding the 97 passengers. In the cockpit, the first officer is completing the setup and performing calculations. The load sheet arrives, and she spotted several mistakes, including a 1-ton discrepancy between the calculated and actual fuel, plus some passenger number errors. Then she corrects those. Okay, the first officer is starting the departure brief by calling out the takeoff speeds. V1, decision speed of 144 knots, rotation speed of 146 knots, and single engine climb speed V2 of 150 knots. Now, these were quite high speeds for a 737-200, but like I mentioned, that's due to the high density altitude and the weight of the aircraft. She also briefs the captain that they'd need to use an engine pressure ratio, or EPR, of 2.18, basically full thrust. So, after she calls that out, she continues the briefing. But the captain interrupts her. He isn't interested in briefing. Instead, he continues his conversation with the purser, who is still in the cockpit, who knows why. So yes, the rest of the briefing was never completed. The departure procedures, what to do in case of an engine failure, which way to turn, minimum safe altitudes, none of that was discussed, right? You know, this is unacceptable. The briefing isn't just a formality. It wakes up your muscle memory. It clarifies roles. It prepares both pilots for what to do if something goes wrong. And at Tamanrasset, the procedure for an engine failure on runway 02 was specific. Climb straight ahead to the TMS VOR, then turn left to heading 239 degrees and climb above the minimum sector altitude of 5,036 feet. None of that was briefed. But back to the story. Eventually, the before start checks are completed. The first officer calls up the tower, advising they're ready for push and start. And here's where it gets even worse, my friend. The captain decided he wants the purser to stay in the cockpit for takeoff, so they can continue their conversation. So the purser occupies the middle jump seat instead of his cabin jump seat as the aircraft starts taxiing out. Come on, in a Boeing 737, there are 4 cabin crew members for a reason. They guard the main emergency exits in case of an evacuation. The purser is the most senior cabin crew, number 3 in the chain of command after the captain and first officer. For him to stay in the cockpit during such a critical phase of flight? Completely wrong. It's 14:08. The crew completes pushback and starts up. The tower instructs them to taxi to the holding point for runway 02. Surface wind, 330 degrees at 12 knots, a slight crosswind from your left.
Otherwise, the weather is perfect. As the aircraft taxis out, the first officer tries to follow standard operating procedures. The captain and purser keeps chatting, seemingly uninterested. Can we chat during the cruise? Yes, we can. But during the briefing and during sterile phases of flight, no way.
You know, when the departure briefing is interrupted by the captain, it indicates to me that he doesn't see it as something really important. But it doesn't matter how familiar you are with an airport, the briefing is extremely important to keep our focus and facilitate crew resource management in the cockpit. I'm wondering what the first officer was thinking about this situation. I found comments about her online stating that she was very professional, so I think she was probably very upset. Okay, 1412. They're at the holding point now. The first officer keys the radio. Tower, flight 6289, ready for departure. The controller's voice comes back crisp. Flight 6289, you're cleared for lineup and takeoff, runway 02. Wind is 330 at 12 knots. The crew confirms flaps 1 is set. The first officer reads back the clearance. The aircraft begins rolling toward the runway centerline. But my friend, deep inside the left engine, hidden from view, invisible to any instrument, something terrible is already waiting to happen. Over thousands of hours of operation, tiny fractures have been spreading through the high-pressure turbine blades. These blades spin just behind the combustion chamber, where temperatures reach extreme levels. The cracks form slowly from thermal stress, hidden beneath a coating of baked-on residue from oxidized engine oil, and nobody detected them during the last overhaul. Nobody could have known they were there, you know? So the captain aligns the aircraft with the runway. His hand moves the thrust levers forward to 1.2 EPR, just enough to let the engine spool up and stabilize. Stabilized, the first officer confirms. The captain pushes the levers all the way forward. Both engines surge to maximum power, that 2.18 EPR they briefed. Well, almost briefed. I have control, the first officer announces. The 737 begins its takeoff roll. 48,000 kilos of aluminum, fuel, and humanity accelerating down the pavement. The captain watches the airspeed tape climb. You have 90, 100, a few seconds tick by, V1, rotate. The first officer pulls back smoothly on the yoke. The nose rises 3 degrees per second, steady and controlled, until the pitch settles around 18 degrees. Airspeed hits 160 knots. The main wheels lift off the concrete. 5 seconds airborne, the first officer calls out, "Gear up."
And right then, at that exact moment, my friend, problems start. Inside the left engine, those weakened turbine blades reach their breaking point. They shatter. Metal fragments tear through the turbine section like shrapnel. Thrust from the left engine vanishes instantly. The turbine starts windmilling, slowing down as it loses power. Behind it, the second stage turbine takes a direct hit from the debris. Hot gases from the combustion chamber, with nowhere else to go, blast directly onto those secondary blades without the cooling airflow they need. Do you remember that I told you about the hot temperature being a problem today? Well, the blades begin melting, and all of this happens in less than 3 seconds. And before you start to think that this is the end, let me tell you that it's not. Yes, this is bad, but it's not the end of the world. The failure stays contained within the engine cowling. No fire breaks out. The right engine keeps delivering full thrust. One engine is more than enough to fly this aircraft safely, if the crew handles it correctly. This exact scenario, we drill it every 6 months in the simulator. Engine failure on takeoff. It's rare in real life, but the 737 is designed to handle it. The performance is there. The procedures are there. That's why I'm telling you, this is not the end. But only if you've prepared to be true, only if you've briefed, only if both pilots know what to do. From a pilot perspective, this crew should be able to manage this, you know? But watch what happens next. This is where everything falls apart. The asymmetric thrust hits immediately. With the left engine dead and the right engine roaring at full power, the aircraft yaws hard to the left, about 12 degrees off centerline. The first officer reacts fast. She stomps right rudder, forcing the nose back toward the right. Her feet work the pedals, fighting the asymmetry. But remember, just 1 second before the engine let go, she'd called for the gear to come up. The captain should have heard that call. He should have responded. But between the sudden bang from the engine, the violent yaw, and his complete lack of mental preparation, he either didn't hear it or it just vanished from his mind. The first officer is working the controls, compensating for the dead engine. She makes a few sharp exclamations: surprise, confusion, adrenaline. "What's going on?" she calls out. Let me walk you through what should happen here. The pilot flying, in this case the first officer, needs to focus on one thing: flying the aircraft. Keep the wings level, maintain airspeed, get the airplane climbing away from the ground. That's it. The pilot monitoring the captain has specific jobs too. First, confirm the aircraft is actually climbing. Positive rate, call for gear up, then retract the landing gear. Next, silence any warnings that might distract the flying pilot. Then start diagnosing what failed.
For the first 400 feet after takeoff, you fly the airplane and clean up the configuration. Gear up, flaps as needed. Make sure you're climbing. Once you're through 400 feet and stable, the pilot flying calls for heading select and identifies the malfunction out loud. The pilot monitoring then works through the memory items, the critical actions you need to do immediately without consulting a checklist. For an engine failure like this, there's a crucial memory item. Move the failed engine's start lever to cutoff. Why? Because that stops fuel flow and prevents further damage. When turbine blades are disintegrating and melting, cutting off the fuel can prevent a fire or an uncontained failure. So, did the captain do this? No, he did not. Instead, just 5 seconds after the engine quit, the captain grabs the controls from the first officer and keeps pitching up to 18 degrees. Now, you might think that makes sense, right? He's the captain. He's in command. If the first officer seems to be struggling, shouldn't he take over? Here's the problem. The captain has no idea what's actually wrong. He heard a bang, he felt the aircraft yaw, but he hasn't assessed anything. He doesn't know it's an engine failure. He doesn't know which engine. He hasn't looked at the instruments. He's reacting on pure instinct without information. Meanwhile, the first officer was actually doing fine. She was handling the aircraft correctly, keeping it under control, responding to the asymmetric thrust just like she'd been trained. Taking over controls during an emergency at low altitude when you haven't been flying the aircraft is incredibly difficult. Every engine failure behaves slightly differently depending on what caused it and what's damaged. You need time to feel the aircraft, to understand what it's doing. The captain doesn't have that time. And he hasn't prepared mentally for this moment because the departure briefing never happened. So now he's in control of an aircraft with an unknown problem at 300 feet above the ground. And he does what his instincts tell him to do: maintain the normal takeoff pitch attitude of 18 degrees. But this isn't a normal takeoff anymore. With one engine failing, a fully loaded aircraft, and the landing gear still hanging out creating massive drag, that 18-degree pitch is way too much. The airspeed starts bleeding off, fast.
Over the next few seconds, the captain yells at the first officer multiple times, "Let go! Let go of the controls!" She responds each time, "I already did." She even offers to retract the landing gear, but the captain doesn't respond. He's tunnel visioned, completely absorbed in trying to control the aircraft. If he even hears her, the words don't register. He's deep in what we call the stress cone, overwhelmed, unable to process additional information. But there's yet another problem developing. Somewhere in these first chaotic seconds, the thrust on the right engine gets reduced. We don't know exactly when or who did it. So now you've got a fully loaded 737 with one engine dead, the other at reduced thrust, landing gear down, and the nose pitched too high. The laws of physics are about to catch up. The captain keeps shouting for the first officer to release the controls. She keeps confirming she already has. Maybe he's feeling resistance in the yoke and assumes she's still holding on. Maybe she is, just instinctively keeping her hands there. We'll never know for sure. What we do know is this: the first officer picks up her radio and transmits to the tower, "We have a small problem." 1 second later, the stick shaker activates. It rattles for about a second, then stops.
12 seconds after the engine failed, the aircraft reaches its maximum altitude, 390 feet. That's as high as it's going to go.
The airspeed has deteriorated so badly that the stick shaker comes back on, and this time it doesn't stop. It rattles continuously, warning the pilots that they're on the edge of a stall. The captain doesn't acknowledge it, doesn't say a word. He just maintains the same pitch attitude while the aircraft begins sinking back toward the earth. Down in the tower, the controller has been watching this whole thing unfold. He saw the aircraft yaw after takeoff. He knew immediately something was very wrong. His hand slams down on the crash alarm. Bells and sirens erupt across the airport. The firefighters scramble to their trucks and race toward the departure end of the runway. In the cockpit, the stick shaker is now joined by another sound. Don't sink, don't sink. The ground proximity warning system has detected they're descending when they should be climbing. The synthetic voice is calm but insistent. The right wing begins to drop, slowly at first, then more pronounced. The stall is developing asymmetrically. And then the horrible moment comes. At 14:15:18, just 30 seconds after the engine failure, Air Algerie Flight 6289 crashed into the ground just beyond the end of runway 02. The tail hits first, then the right wing slams down. The impact is catastrophic. Fuel tanks rupture instantly, thousands of liters of jet fuel spray out and ignite. The aircraft becomes a fireball, breaking apart as it slides across the terrain. It tears through the airport perimeter fence, crosses a road, and finally grinds to a stop in a scattered field of burning wreckage. The fire is immediate and all-consuming. Most of the fuselage is engulfed within seconds. The firefighters arrive 3 minutes later. They do everything they can, but there's almost nothing left to save. 103 people were on board that aircraft. The 2 pilots, 4 cabin crew, the purser, who should never have been in the cockpit, and 97 passengers. 102 of them are killed instantly.
But here is the miracle. One person survives. Do you remember that 28-year-old conscript sitting in the last row? The one who didn't fasten his seatbelt? Yes, he survived. Why? Because when the aircraft broke apart on impact, he was thrown clear of the wreckage, ejected into the air while the rest of the cabin disintegrated around him. It probably saved his life. He's badly injured, broken bones, burns, trauma. He'll spend days in a coma before waking up, but he'll live. Him and those 3 passengers who got turned away at check-in due to document problems, do you remember? They're the luckiest people in Algeria that day. Everyone else is gone. The big question, who is responsible for the disaster? The airplane problem? The captain? The first officer? All of them together? Well, let's deep dive in the accident investigation, and I'll give you all the answers. Keep watching. So, what actually went wrong here? Well, the investigation concluded that this accident was caused by a loss of engine thrust during a critical phase of flight, followed by the crew's failure to retract the landing gear and the captain taking control without proper preparation or understanding of the problem. Let me break this down from a pilot perspective, because this accident was entirely preventable. I'll prove to you. First, the engine failure itself. Yes, the turbine blades fractured due to thermal fatigue, and those cracks went undetected. That's a maintenance and inspection issue. But here's the thing, an engine failure on takeoff, while serious, is something every commercial airliner is designed to handle. The Boeing 737 can absolutely fly and climb on one engine, even at maximum takeoff weight. The performance is there. The aircraft was capable of surviving this moment. So, my opinion, what failed was the crew.
Let's talk about what should have happened versus what actually happened. The departure briefing should have been completed, including the emergency procedures for an engine failure after takeoff from runway 02, the specific heading to fly, the minimum safe altitude, when to turn, all of that should have been fresh in both pilots' minds. It wasn't briefed at all because the captain was too busy chatting with the purser. Think about it. If they had briefed properly, both pilots would have been mentally prepared. When that engine failed, they would have known exactly what to do. The first officer would have kept flying, the captain would have retracted the gear, identified the failed engine, moved the start lever to cut off, and supported his colleague. Instead, the captain, unprepared and surprised, grabbed the controls from a first officer who was actually handling the situation correctly. He took over an aircraft he hadn't been flying, with a problem he hadn't diagnosed, at just 300 feet above the ground. That's a recipe for disaster, understand? Second issue, the gear was never retracted. The first officer called for it. She even offered again to retract it. But the captain, deep in the stress cone, either didn't hear her or couldn't process the information. With the gear hanging out, creating massive drag, the aircraft needed a much lower pitch attitude to maintain airspeed and climb. The captain kept pitching at 18 degrees, appropriate for a normal takeoff, but deadly with one engine and the gear down. Third issue, the thrust on the remaining good engine was reduced at some point. We don't know exactly when or who did it, but it happened. Maybe panic, maybe a reflexive reaction to the yaw. Either way, it robbed them of the thrust they desperately needed. The investigation also found that the timing of the failure, occurring just as the first officer called for gear up, contributed to the confusion. The captain's lack of preparation, the non-existent crew resource management after the failure, and the presence of the purser in the cockpit during a critical phase all played roles.
But let me be clear, the systemic issues here run deep. The captain's casual attitude toward standard operating procedures, the airline's apparent tolerance of this behavior, the lack of sterile cockpit discipline, these aren't individual failures. These are cultural problems within the organization, my point of view. Okay, but what's the point of investigating an accident and finding out what went wrong? Well, so that we fix problems and try to prevent accidents like Flight 6289 from happening again, right? So, what happened after this accident? This is what I'm going to show you right now. Stick with me. So, what did the aviation industry learn from Flight 6289? The good news is that this accident led to 4 major recommendations that changed how Air Algerie and other airlines operated. First, increased crew resource management training for all Air Algerie pilots. Second, better conformity in engine failure training. The investigation found inconsistencies in how different crews were trained to handle engine failures on takeoff. Standardization became critical. Every pilot needed to respond the same way, following the same procedures, executing the same memory items. No more variations, no more personal techniques. Third, implementation of a comprehensive flight safety program. Air Algerie needed systems to monitor and analyze flight data to identify dangerous trends before they became accidents. Flight data recorders could flag unstable approaches, procedural violations, and risky behaviors. This allows airlines to intervene with additional training before someone gets hurt. Fourth, reinforcement of sterile cockpit procedures. The presence of the purser in the cockpit during takeoff was completely unacceptable. Cabin crew belong in the cabin during critical phases, guarding exits, ready to evacuate. Non-essential personnel and conversations have no place in the cockpit during taxi, takeoff, and landing. Okay, if you found this story valuable, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share it with fellow aviation enthusiasts, right? I am Captain Jack Mercer. Thanks for being my co-pilot today, and I'll see you in the next one.